Your Story with Melinda Estabrooks, an exclusive presentation of Faith Strong Today.
Well, welcome back to another show on Your Story with Melinda, and get ready for an adventure of your lifetime. I know I'm being extreme, but my guest with me is a guy full of adventure and great thought on so many different things. My guest today is Jeremy Enns. He is the co-host of the Open Road podcast, where you will find adventure in the everyday. He's an experiential learning facilitator with Eagles Flight. And I'll say this, he's a really cool millennial. I hate giving, labels, but I am, who has a lot to say about faith, life, and love. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Melinda. It's really nice to be with you today.
Awesome. And I know you're not going to mess up because you're actually a podcaster as well, so this should be kind of normal.
Yeah,
or
it's
you
pretty
should be
natural.
Okay,
it's just
good.
We're hanging out, having a conversation, and it's definitely a fun thing and a sweet spot for me. So thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, listen, let's start off with, because I know my listeners and watchers always want to know who the person is that's with me. So let's kind of hear about your story. Sure. And I think also, how did your own faith, your own Christian faith, become real to you, that it actually works for you in your life today? So let's just hear about you.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town called Niagara-on-the-Lake, beautiful little town. I'm a good Mennonite boy. Grew up in the Mennonite church, and very early on, my parents had always been adventurous and travelers themselves. So they took us on a lot of trips when we were really little. The first time I was in Germany, I think I was 6 years old. Mm. The first time they took our whole family down to Guatemala to drill wells. I think my youngest sister was 8, I was 10, my older sister was 12. So kind of from a very early age, not only was I raised with certain principles and my Christian faith, but then I also saw the way that not only my parents lived their faith out, but the way missionaries brought their whole families down to a foreign place. And I got to be there, kind of on the ground, watching different things get done and interacting with kids from different cultures. And some of those experiences early on were really meaningful for me, and also helped me to really understand what faith was all about and what it meant to love people and to give generously and to show the world just what it means to sacrifice different things. And so I saw that from different people in my life, and then I started to see the way that was working for me.
Jeremy, I love that. I wish everybody had an opportunity like that. Mm-hmm. And for me, too, being a missionary kid, adopted in the Philippines, my family were there to be missionaries. Yep. And you get to see a lot of that kind of sacrificial living, giving, loving. And in our case, as a missionary family, there were times where we had zero money. And I remember we're like, we got to pray. Yeah. Is somebody from Canada going to give us something? God, what are you going to do? Yeah. And all of a sudden, honestly, and it sounds so crazy, but the doorbell would ring and there'd be this big package from a church in Canada or a family who said, we just happened to feel that you needed this time. Here it is. And we were like, we have food or we have clothes, right?
And that idea was really inspiring to me as well, to look at this family who literally took everything and moved to a place to do something like this, and to see the way that then they experienced faith and they experienced this type of generosity, and it inspired me to be the type of person who might go and put themselves on the front line where some of that cool stuff is happening. I think a lot of times if you're playing it really safe or afraid to take certain risks, a lot of that really neat stuff doesn't end up happening, or it's not that it can't, but when you're in a place of great need, then every little thing you can really see as, you're a little more in tune, I guess, with what God might be up to.
Yeah, see, I think that's good, because I've had discussions with my friends about, especially in North America, yes, we have needs, but not the kind of needs, I would say, like physical needs, food and water, clothing,
totally.
Those, outside of North America. Obviously, yes, there are those needs here too, but even growing up, there's something that when you see it and witness it, you realize how much more you really need God. That there's actually, now you understand what the word faith is and trust, where sometimes here in North America I've sat and people are like, I don't really understand or really have been at that place of absolute need and trust for him, or to have him in my life, a relationship with him, or in the need of community. Whereas in the Philippines, where community was everything, because we couldn't be without people, or else Totally. That was it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you come back, you see all these things.
Yeah.
You come back to Canada. what happens as you're sort of forming and sort of your formation as a young man, going to school, growing up? How does that impact you as you go through your life?
So, I mean, I think this started to kind of, I guess, be a bit of a catalyst for my thirst for different types of adventures. So, I always, I have the personality type where I like to have new experiences, and I'm a little more extroverted, a little more spontaneous. And so for me, it was kind of always, what is that next thing that I can do? And I think that there are pros and cons to that, right? Instead of, maybe taking a little more time to reflect on something that's happened, I kind of found myself always trying to get on to the next thing. And if I wouldn't be doing something, I would think I was wasting my time or I wasn't living out my faith properly. So there's some challenges with that. But throughout university, I took a number of trips down to Bolivia, and I actually led a trip down to Bolivia where we worked in an orphanage, which was a really neat experience. And again, you're just getting right on the ground floor with people who are really living this type of stuff out day to day. Whatever your thoughts on short-term missions might be, they're really really incredible experiences for people and for me especially. And, there was another trip that I took with some buddies of mine from church where we went to Israel and Palestine and explored all kinds of different aspects of peace and conflict and the history of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam within that region. And it was just a fascinating trip. So all of these trips I had taken were adventurous, but they also had this element of exploration and also a little bit of a higher purpose, whether it was learning or serving or doing things like that. So as I'm kind of going on from one trip to the next or one experience to the next, we were in university and we kind of looked at our summer, my close friends and I, and we were kind of wondering what we might do with our summer, and we kind of started sending links to campers to each other from Kijiji and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool to drive across the country? We hadn't seen our whole country. We'd seen other parts of the world, but Canada is this gorgeous and vast place. And so, little trailers that you attach to your car turned into us sending pictures of RVs and different things like that. And we ended up finding this beautiful RV, 1979 GMC, ancient thing, for $2,000 on Kijiji. And we went to the guy's house in December and we bought it. And then we spent the next 4 months fixing it up. And then we hit the road and drove across the country.
Now, Jeremy, when you say beautiful, you mean beautiful, like aesthetically? Yes. When you say beautiful, to me, I'm thinking like an HGTV.
No,
perfectly done up.
That's not beauty. That's not true beauty. True beauty is like a vintage and classic look, plus a nasty interior with seats that have been sat in by who knows who. That's what we mean by beautiful.
Okay.
It's a beautiful story, this thing that tells. It tells 30 years of stories.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So you buy this
So we buy
RV.
it. And again, with our experiences, kind of, these were all my buddies that I'd grown up going to church with or had gone to high school with. And so we said, how can we not just make this trip about seeing Canada, which we want to do when we want to have fun, and in some ways it is about us, but we had this idea that isn't a new one, but to do random acts of kindness as we traveled across the country.
So cool.
And this was really cool because it forced us to actually create the opportunities where we would live out our faith versus going on a trip where you kind of just go and everything is done for you, and you feel like you're doing something good. This was us, calling up a random church in the town ahead and saying, is there a need, and putting ourselves out there, or seeing a guy who's raking his lawn at the side of the road and 5 gruff guys going up and saying, can we help you, and being really turned off or really nervous. And this was a really neat way for us to actually say, what does it look like for me to live my faith out every day in a way that no one is telling us what to do, no one is showing us what to do. And it was sometimes a real challenge to actually take that step to go and put yourself out there. And so it was a really neat opportunity.
What was your favorite moment? I mean, for me as a woman, there's a bit of that sort of fear in you're just driving, first of all, with no plan in a sense. Like you're kind of doing your thing. So for me as like a control freak of like planning, it's like that's so. And second, the people you're meeting, are you going to be safe? So there's a lot of elements to what you're doing where there's like, safety concern.
Safety was never a concern.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So as you go about, what would you say is one of the most, amazing experiences or people that you met along this journey?
Yeah, there was one, there's one specific story where it's really interesting. On a trip like this, you look at different parts of the journey and you're much more aware of how A led to B and then B led to C and so you kind of, it's a really interesting feeling when you get to a place of excitement or a place of hardship and you kind of think about the events that led you there. All of life is like that, but on a trip like this, it was much easier to see what led to what. We got to Calgary and our transmission blew. And it was the Friday before a long weekend, and we were already a few days behind because RV travels slower than you might imagine, or we spent a couple extra days in Winnipeg or whatever it might have been. And we blew our transmission, and it was going to be at least $1,500 to fix, and we had a very fixed budget. 5 guys, we put a pool of money together. And this moment was really interesting because we were at a county fair that weekend. And at the county fair, we were kind of watching the chuck wagon races. But before that, there was this event called the Running with the Bulls. And the Running with the Bulls was a group of crazy people who would be on the chuck wagon race, and then bulls would come and run.
No.
And the person who did the most daring thing, as told by the judges, would win $1,000 cash.
Okay.
And so we kind of, we basically were watching this. It was a Saturday night, and we found out that it was happening again Sunday night.
Oh, no. I can totally see and hear what's coming. Okay.
Making an epic and long story short, we enter the Running with the Bulls. And now this is something that was unsafe. And I, out of the 5 of us, was more scared than anyone. And I will openly admit that it was not my cup of tea. But we're in the ring with these massive bulls.
Oh, no.
And the one friend, Jamie, basically this pack of bulls charges past us and mercifully didn't hit anybody. And then he starts chasing it down. And as he's chasing it down, he gets closer and closer and closer, puts both his hands on the back of the bull and basically mounts the bull.
No, he doesn't.
And at this point, the crowd is absolutely going wild. And then after this round of bulls finishes, the judges call up the 5 people that they've seen that were daring, my friend being one of them, Jamie. And because there were 4 of us in the crowd, we were able to hype up the cheering, the applausometer for him. So the other interesting thing, too, is the people who were organizing the event were some local pastors, and we were actually staying with them, and we knew them. They were pastors of the people we were staying at their church. Yeah. And so they kind of relayed our story to some of the judges that we were these guys from all the way across the other side of the country. We were, out a bunch of money because our transmission blew. And again, then when the applausometer happened, Jamie ended up winning. We won our $1,000 cash. We're basically able to pay for most of the repairs. And it was, again, one of those moments where we were, obviously, it was so exciting to win $1,000 and to hold it.
Absolutely, it's crazy.
And then, the other amazing thing is there was someone who was willing to stay on a weekend to fix our RV. So on Monday, we had this amazing story and had watched all the different people we had interacted with, pastors who we had put ourselves out there for, a family who had taken us in, and to kind of get our story shared about some of the random acts of kindness and things that we were doing. It was this really beautiful moment. So on the first trip, that was probably the best moment. And there's a lot more details to the story, but I'll leave it there.
All right, that's awesome. So 5 guys in the RV.
Yeah.
How long is the trip across Canada?
This one was 5 weeks.
So 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh my, 5 guys in an RV.
I learned so much on this trip, and we were in our really early 20s, and I learned so much about leadership and about team and about making decisions. And many of those lessons I'm only learning now as I rehash what happened and how some of those tensions, when the tensions got high. But it was just an absolutely fantastic experience.
When you step outside, as you just said, now as it's over and you're looking back and you're rehashing, looking at that, how does God, faith play into that? Because I want to, and Jeremy, for me, it's like, God is in the everyday, and I love that where you're saying, you find adventure in the everyday. That's sort of the tagline of your podcast, this open road podcast. But talk to me about that, because so many times, especially for those that are older, faith has always been sort of the separate thing. We go to church, we have faith, we do our Jesus thing, and then life over here is different, and there's been a lot of compartmentalization and separation. Yeah. for you, though, it sounds like it's so integrated that that faith and people and adventure and cool experiences running with the bulls is all part of life and faith. Talk to us about that. Talk to me about that, because I think that's a really it will be an eye-opening thought for some, and for some it's like, how do I do that? How do I get there?
And I think that was one of the biggest things that I learned about on this trip, because we had this goal to do random acts of kindness for different people and to show them love and to show them generosity. And when we're sitting back at our home, we had a big garage sale to raise some money that we could just give away. We're at the garage sale, people are there, we're making some money, and it's this really exciting and in some ways romanticized part of the trip where you just have so many dreams and hopes for what's going to come. And then when we were out there, there could be 3 days that went by when we didn't see anyone, or we didn't meet anyone, or we didn't actually do anything meaningful. And so it was really from there kind of troubleshooting and asking ourselves as a group of guys, well, what could we be doing and what should we be doing? And so we came up with even little ideas like, every morning when we would drive this hilarious rig through the Tim Hortons drive-through, we would buy the people behind us their coffee and muffin. And it was just that small, simple gesture of generosity. And I think with how busy people are in their lives today, if you don't take time to think intentionally about what might a small show of generosity be today, what might a small act of love look like today, then it won't happen. And it's something that these trips, and we've done a bunch of them to the East Coast of Canada and other parts of North America, they continually remind me and help me to shape the mindset where, if I don't if I don't intentionally think about an act of generosity, an act of love in a given day, a day will go by no problem.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That's why, the tagline for the podcast is finding adventure in the everyday. What's a one little thing that you can add to your day, a new experience or a new something? And it's the same with faith. How do we live out our faith every day? You're not going to be running with the bulls every day. You're not going to be, going out and serving your neighbor every single day, or, at the church soup kitchen or whatever it might be every day. But God has us where we are, and He will use us, and He'll put people on our path, whether it's even our own family. That's another thing that I learned a lot about, who are the people that that are in my life that I need to love. I could love my parents better. I could love both of my sisters better. I could love my wife better. So, you don't even need to look way beyond or to do some extravagant trip or go on even a missions trip. There are people right now in everyone's life that need more love, or that you could easily show some generosity to.
And Jeremy, that's such a great reminder, because I think even within sort of our Christian church culture, it's always been the big thing, the big act. And so people get all, full of angst and trepidation and stress, because you're always like, I got to go out there and do something amazing. I've been designed for something big and great, so I have to get outside. And it's a good reminder what you said, because in the everyday, I believe that's what Jesus calls us to do. It's love our neighbor, and our neighbor is our family, and our neighbor can be our actually physical neighbor right beside us, or neighbor can be, whether it is like the Tim Hortons, person in the drive-through. And so I think that's good to know, and I think that's great that, your podcast, because it was a blog, right? So you decided to write about it.
Yeah,
and
so
make
during
it a blog
all these trips, we basically wrote a blog, and we called it the Open Road Project, because we're on the open road. It's become a little catchy name. We thought it was okay. So we ended up writing a blog and writing down all our stories. So if you want to find that, it's torpblog.com.
Okay.
We haven't updated it in a while because we haven't been on too many trips, and now we're doing some podcasting. But all of our stories are listed out there, and it became pretty popular, which was pretty cool.
And then with the podcast, and your hope though is that it's where you're sharing the stories of people, everyday people, and that they are finding as well sort of this in the everyday, the adventure in their everyday.
Exactly. So on the podcast, we try to interview people who are doing interesting things in the world, who might even be doing some of those bigger things. And then we hear some of the stories of how they got to that place, or their philosophy on adding more adventure and a little more, I guess, energy and excitement and meaning to the things that they do.
That's awesome. So here's 5 guys in an RV.
Yeah.
You're telling me that, this whole faith and adventure, I mean, you can go out there and buy an RV and do that, but also adventure can actually happen even within our everyday. And I think we have to, redefine adventure.
Sure.
Because I think, again, adventure is for a lot of people, what you did, what you're doing. But adventure can be in our everyday, looking for opportunities to serve, looking for opportunities to push yourself, be courageous, and go talk to someone or do an act of a random act of kindness. And I think that redefining adventure is really key.
And that's one thing we do on the podcast. We try to get a ton of perspectives. When you think of adventure, again, you think of going on a road trip, climbing a mountain, going on a camping trip, or doing things like this. But you could almost substitute the word meaning, because when we've gone on adventures, we found a lot of meaning there. So what is it? We're really, when we dig down into it, it's kind of the umbrella of adventure, but how do we really find more meaning in the things that we're doing?
Yeah. Do you think, Jeremy, in the beginning I introduced you as this really cool millennial, who has thoughts on your generation, and that's pretty big to put on you. But would you say, is that sort of a marker of a millennial? Millennial, they've said from Time Magazine and others, is born from 1980 to the year 2000. So some range 15 years old to 35, whatever that is. But, I am Gen X, so I'm right after, Gen Y or millennials. But would that be a marker of millennial adventure? And talk, I guess I want to sort of get into your head, before we end, the show, about understanding you as a millennial in your own faith, how you're wired. Because I think it would be just really informative for me to understand, sort of your generation.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, an interesting topic, and one that I haven't put a ton of thought to, but it is interesting for me now. I'm a few years out of university. I've been working, a pretty standard 9 to 5 for the past 3 years. And so it's very interesting for me now to balance what I love about adventure, my desire and thirst for adventure, now with starting a family and understanding what it takes to, to build a life together and to, do some of those more traditional things that, our parents and our parents' parents did before us. So it's very interesting for me now to kind of wrestle with some of that, and I am really grateful that I was able to go on some of these trips and adventures, because one thing that I've realized is, while it's easy to romanticize that type of thing, and I think many millennials and maybe even many people do, there is a whole lot to be said for a bunch of the other ways that other generations have done things, and the way that they've maybe built families and done other things like that. So right now I'm kind of caught between this place where I'm trying to balance what I hear from different of my peers and different things like that versus some of the other more traditional ways of thinking. And I think that is a big struggle for millennials, where on one hand, we are told that the world is our oyster. We can kind of do whatever we want, be whatever we want. It's really easy to see people who are doing that and who have achieved that. And then on the other hand, we're trying to figure out, well, what works for me and how do I find meaning and I guess fulfillment in life. And I think one thing that millennials are really searching for, and I think really all people, is authenticity. Yeah. And with so much more information at everybody's fingertips, it's much more difficult in my mind to find real authenticity, or if you think you find it, you'll easily find 40 other opinions that go exactly against what that one might be. And so I think that's a big challenge for millennials and for a lot of other people to really find any solid ground to stand on.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because one of the things that I like about, so there's the pros and cons about more information, is that when I was growing up, it was always sort of this one way. Yeah. You're going to listen to the pastor, that's the truth. Yeah. And you're going to listen to, these holy men and women, and that's the truth. And whenever you wanted to question or divert from that, you're whispering in cars or feeling like you're a bit of, a renegade, and in hidden small groups discussing this new way of doing church or doing life. And so there was that part. And so with more information, that's good. However, I do see the struggle, especially for millennials, that there's so much more information, especially with social media, the trying to manage and figure out what is true or what to live by can be daunting and hard. Totally. Because you're like, you're right, 50 opinions, what is right? So now do I talk to my parents? Do I talk to the pastor? Do I go on this website, listen to a podcast to figure it out? And so there's a lot of more coming at you, at us, and you're trying to weed through it all. what would you say would be, the best ways to then, figure out what is true and works for you? What would you say?
I think that is another reason why I love talking about adventure and why I love going on adventures and having new experiences, because through these new experiences, you get to see the way that other people do life and the way that other people process information and the other things that people believe. And not only that, but you get to put yourself into a place that you would not otherwise have been in. And these experiences that shape us, for me anyways, they have been the things that have really helped me to understand and really buy into, the stories that I grew up with and the faith that I grew up with. Because I see that when you show people love, you are generous, and you sacrificially offer yourself to people, to the world, that really great stuff happens. And not that you expect great stuff to happen, but those are also the times when you're stretched the most and you're grown the most. And so that is, I think, why we enjoy talking about it, not to have adventure for the sake of adventure, but adventure for the sake of opening your mind to new perspectives and really trying to think about, well, what actually works and what is truth. And we find that when we put ourselves out there in a certain way, even if someone shuts us down or whatever, now I get to wrestle with, was that the best thing to do? Is there a different way? Or do I firmly believe that by offering X, that was the right thing to do for me? And you only get that through experiences and through putting yourselves out there. And by going on a grand adventure, you're more in the mindset to start to do that.
I think, Jeremy, that's such a good point, because I think the world is much more open to people who are serving and giving and loving generously and being open rather than closed and just, either hiding away in our churches and forcing people to come to us versus going out there and giving of ourselves.
I'm not saying you can't get burned by doing some of that stuff
absolutely.
either, right?
I get it. Yeah, absolutely. But I think that there is a part of, in our own Christian faith, that we need to take the courage and be brave to get out there. And out there means, again, it's not necessarily going way out there, to the world, but it's getting out and meeting with people, hanging out with people that are different than you, being open to different people's religions and thoughts and not being afraid of it, but engaging in conversation and life and when I say breaking bread, having dinner with them, right? And so I think that's such a good reminder. I think that, as you go about your life, it's good. I'm so glad that, you're here, because even for me, there's sometimes I kind of get stuck.
Sure.
And I want to be more comfortable and safe than actually putting myself out there and actually, serving and loving the way that I believe Jesus modeled, in the scriptures. Like, he was out there. He sat and had, dinner with his disciples and hung out, but a lot more than not that we read, he's out there.
Totally.
With the people. Last thoughts of encouragement. If you want to be more adventurous or want to get out there, what would you say would be some key things that you need to do?
I would say find a friend or a couple of friends and you just start small. Go and do something that you've never done, whether it's, even just a local attraction. Just get out with people, try something new and interesting, try a new experience. That's another reason why we started the podcast, is because we can't go on 5-week-long adventures anymore. We only have, maybe a weekend or maybe a certain time. But start to think about, like, even just look at your last week and say, how many times did I show someone love in a way that I don't usually, or did I, show someone some generosity? And if there's no times in your week, no problem. In the next week ahead, think of one way to try to do that, and one way to either have a new experience that puts you in a place that you wouldn't otherwise have been. And I think that's probably a decent enough place to start.
That's awesome. Well, Jeremy, co-host of the Open Road podcast, great to have you here. I'm encouraged. I want to go out now and figure out my adventure. Really appreciate your thoughts, and all the best. I can't wait to listen and read about your next adventure on the road.
Thanks so much, Melinda.
All right, thanks.
Your Story with Melinda Estabrooks. Listen for new episodes every Monday and subscribe to the podcast at faithstrongtoday.com.